The sound of a door slamming echoed through the small apartment, sharp and final. Sarah stood in the doorway, clutching her son close to her chest. The air felt heavy, charged with a mix of fear and anger. Her ex-husband stormed out, his face contorted in rage. His betrayal had shattered her world once again. "You think I'm the problem? You're the one who can't keep your life together." His words cut deep, leaving scars that would never fully heal. As he slammed the door behind him, Sarah felt the weight of the past years crash over her, threatening to drown her. Her heart raced, her thoughts spinning. The sirens wailing in the distance reminded her that the storm was far from over. Her son looked up at her, his big eyes wide with fear. "Mom, what's going to happen to us?" he asked. Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't have an answer. But one thing was certain: she would protect him, no matter the cost. The next day, the weight of the argument still hung heavy in the air. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping a mug of cold coffee. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft light through the window, but her thoughts were dark. Ben had gone off to school, his small backpack bouncing on his shoulders as he waved goodbye, unaware of the storm brewing in their lives. Sarah hadn't slept. Her mind replayed the moments from the night before, her ex-husband's words echoing in her mind. The betrayal she thought she had buried was now at the surface, raw and exposed. But it wasn't just the betrayal that tore at her. It was the looming battle ahead. The custody hearing. Tom had made it clear he wasn't backing down. He had the money, the influence, and the drive to win. But Sarah had something Tom didn't. She had the heart of a mother willing to fight for her child's future. She wasn't going to let him take Ben from her. Not without a fight. Later that day, Sarah met with her lawyer, a woman named Clara, female 40s, who had been with her through the early stages of the divorce. The meeting was at Clara's office, a quiet space with bookshelves full of legal books and papers stacked neatly on the desk. The tension was palpable. Clara's face was calm, but there was concern in her eyes as Sarah laid out the details of her latest encounter with Tom. "He's not backing down, Clara," Sarah said, her voice tight. "He's going to fight for custody with everything he's got, and I don't know if I can do this alone." Clara nodded thoughtfully, reviewing the documents in front of her. "You're not alone, Sarah. We're in this together. But you need to be prepared. Tom is ruthless. He'll use everything against you." Sarah looked down at her hands. She had already given so much, and now it felt like the world was closing in around her. "I can't lose Ben, Clara. I can't." Clara leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "We'll make sure you don't." After the meeting, Sarah felt both empowered and defeated. The road ahead was long, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. She returned home, finding Ben's drawing on the refrigerator, a simple sketch of the two of them, holding hands in the sun. A lump formed in Sarah's throat as she stood there staring at it. Ben was her world, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. She hadn't realized just how much the custody battle had affected him until she saw him that evening. He had been quieter than usual, withdrawn in a way that she hadn't seen before. As they sat down to dinner, Sarah tried to mask her anxiety with a forced smile. "How was school today, sweetie?" she asked, watching his every move. Ben shrugged, pushing his food around on his plate. "It was fine," he said, his voice small. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settle in. She wasn't the only one fighting this battle, and she wouldn't let her son face it alone. That night, as Sarah tucked Ben into bed, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "I promise you we'll be okay." Ben didn't respond, his eyes already closed, his small body curled under the blanket. Sarah stayed there for a moment longer, watching him sleep. His peaceful face was a stark contrast to the storm that raged in her mind. She had always protected him from the world, but now the world was coming for them both. And she was running out of time. The next day, the court date was set. Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready, but there was no turning back now. She had to face her past and her future, for Ben. With a deep breath, she turned off the light and closed the door, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The days that followed felt like a blur to Sarah. Each moment was filled with uncertainty, and every glance at Ben reminded her of what was at stake. The custody hearing loomed closer, and with each passing day, her anxiety grew. At work, the tension was just as palpable. Sarah had been juggling long shifts at the diner, but her boss, Ray, male 45, had begun to make offhand remarks about her performance. "You can't keep dragging your feet, Sarah," he said one morning, his tone sharp. "If this keeps up, I might have to find someone else to cover your shifts." Her heart sank. With the custody battle already draining her energy, she couldn't afford to lose her job too. "I'll get it together, Ray, I promise," she replied, forcing a smile. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when Ben needed her most. Later that evening, Sarah returned home, her thoughts weighed down by the threat of losing her job. As she walked through the door, Ben rushed to greet her. His face lit up when he saw her, his small arms wrapping around her waist. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax. This was the reason she kept fighting. "How was your day, sweetie?" Sarah asked, crouching down to his level. Ben smiled. "We learned about space today. Miss Jenny says there are stars bigger than our sun." His excitement was contagious, and for a moment, the weight of her struggles faded. But it didn't last long. As she prepared dinner, Sarah glanced at the clock, feeling the pressure of the hearing growing closer. Tom hadn't called to ask about Ben, and his absence hurt more than she cared to admit. She had to stay strong for Ben, even though it felt like everything was falling apart. The following morning, Sarah was greeted with more bad news. Her lawyer, Clara, female 40s, called with an update on the custody case. "I need to be honest with you, Sarah," Clara said, her voice tense. "Tom is pulling out all the stops. His lawyer has already subpoenaed your financial records and is digging into your past. They're trying to discredit you at every turn." Sarah's heart dropped. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We fight back. But you need to be prepared. They're going to try to make you look like an unfit mother." Sarah clenched her fists. The emotional toll was already too much, and now she was being forced to relive everything. "I can't let him win," she said, her voice steady but laced with fear. "I won't." Clara's tone softened. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. We'll get through this." Sarah spent the next few days scrambling to gather everything she needed for the case. Documents, receipts, letters, everything Tom could use to paint her in a bad light. It felt like she was living in a constant state of chaos, fighting against forces that she didn't fully understand. Each time she went to bed, she was too tired to sleep, her mind racing with what-ifs. That night, as she was organizing her files, she got an unexpected call from an old friend, Megan, female 30s, who had always been her rock. "I heard about the custody battle, Sarah. I know things are tough, but you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you no matter what." Megan's words were a small comfort, and for the first time in days, Sarah felt like she wasn't completely alone. She had a friend who cared, someone who could help her through this. As the court date drew closer, Sarah spent every waking moment preparing. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that Tom had the upper hand. His lawyer's tactics were aggressive, and the emotional toll of the battle was starting to show. On the morning of the hearing, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, fixing her hair, trying to steady her nerves. Ben was still asleep, unaware of the weight she was carrying. As she applied a final touch of makeup, she looked at herself. The woman in the mirror was tired, worn down by the endless fight. But beneath the exhaustion there was something else: determination. She had fought too long and sacrificed too much to let Tom take everything from her now. As she looked at the clock, she whispered to herself, "I will fight for you, Ben, no matter what it takes." The courtroom was cold, its sterile atmosphere weighing down on Sarah as she took her seat. The judge, a stern figure, glanced at her briefly before turning to her ex-husband, who sat across the room, his lawyer speaking in his defense. Sarah's heart raced as she clutched the folder containing the evidence she had painstakingly gathered. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let anyone see. Tom's lawyer, a sharp woman named Karen, female late 30s, stood and began her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, This is not a case about love or family. This is about what's best for the child, and given the circumstances, Sarah is simply not the kind of mother who can provide that." Each word felt like a dagger. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken out loud made it feel real. Her past, the struggles, the mistakes, was being laid out for everyone to see. She fought to keep her composure, but the shame threatened to overwhelm her. As Karen continued her argument, Sarah felt a cold chill creeping up her spine. The lawyer's words painted her as unfit, even though she had always done her best. She thought of Ben, his innocent face, his unwavering trust in her. She wasn't the perfect mother, but she had always been there for him. The guilt settled in her chest like a stone. Her ex-husband had brought up her financial struggles, the late payments, the times she'd been forced to work long hours to make ends meet. It was all true, but it wasn't the full picture. No one saw the nights she stayed up, making sure Ben was fed, loved, and safe. No one saw the sacrifices she'd made to keep him out of harm's way. But today, in that cold courtroom, it didn't matter. She was being judged by a past she was trying to outrun, a past she had no control over anymore. The hearing dragged on for hours. By the time the court adjourned for the day, Sarah was emotionally drained. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, and it made her skin crawl. Outside the courtroom, she found Megan waiting for her. Her friend embraced her, but Sarah felt distant. "You did well," Megan said, her voice soothing. But Sarah could barely hear her. The only thing that mattered was the way Tom had looked at her. The cold, triumphant look in his eyes made her stomach turn. "It's not over yet," Sarah said, her voice low. "But I don't know if I can keep doing this." Megan pulled back slightly, searching her face. "You have to. For Ben. You can't give up." Sarah nodded, but the doubt was creeping in. What if she wasn't enough? That night, Sarah stayed up long after Ben had gone to bed. The house was silent, save for the occasional rustle of papers and the ticking of the clock. She was too anxious to sleep. She thought back to when she first left Tom, when everything seemed like it was going to get better. But now, every step forward felt like 2 steps back. Tom had made sure of that. His lawyer had every angle covered. She couldn't help but wonder if she was just fighting a losing battle. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Tom. "You'll never win this, Sarah. Ben deserves better." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. But Sarah wasn't going to let him win. She couldn't. Not when it came to Ben. She took a deep breath, wiped away a tear, and set her phone aside. Tomorrow, the fight continued. The next morning, Sarah drove Ben to school, her mind still swirling with the events of the previous day. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping out of her control. When they arrived at the school, Ben turned to her with a bright smile, his eyes full of innocence. "Mom, do you think we'll get a dog soon? I want a puppy," he asked, his voice filled with hope. Sarah smiled softly, her heart aching. "We'll see, sweetie," she said, trying to hide the sadness in her voice. As Ben ran off to join his friends, Sarah stood there for a moment, watching him. He deserved so much more than the fight she was dragging him into. But she couldn't stop now. She had to keep going for him. The days leading up to the next hearing were filled with a nervous energy that Sarah couldn't shake. Her work performance continued to slide as she juggled legal documents and court dates, but she had no choice. This was her fight, and she couldn't afford to back down. It was early morning when Clara, her lawyer, called with an update. "Sarah, I've got some good news. We've found a witness who can testify on your behalf. It won't be easy, but it could tip the scales in our favor." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "A witness? Who?" Clara's voice softened. "It's Megan. She's willing to testify about the environment Ben has at home and your ability to provide for him." Sarah's relief was overwhelming. Megan had always been her rock, and now she was stepping up in the most crucial moment. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the weight of the battle starting to feel lighter. "We're not giving up. Not now." With Megan's support, Sarah felt a new sense of determination. As the courtroom hearing drew closer, Sarah began rehearsing what she would say, but the fear never fully left. When the day arrived, Sarah entered the courtroom with Ben by her side. Hello. He was small for his age, but his presence felt like a shield. He kept glancing up at her, his small hand tightly clutching hers. As they sat down, she felt a jolt of anxiety, but Ben squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll be okay, Mom," he whispered, his innocence somehow calming her. It was time to face Tom again, and this time she wouldn't back down. The judge called the room to order, and the battle began once more. The battle in court was fierce. Tom's lawyer pushed hard, questioning Sarah's ability to support Ben financially, even questioning her parenting skills. Sarah could feel the weight of every word, but she held her ground. She spoke about the sacrifices she made, the love she had for Ben, and how far she was willing to go to protect him. "I'm not perfect," she said, her voice trembling but strong, "but I've never given up on him. I'm the only mother he has, and I will fight for him no matter the cost." The words felt like they were coming from somewhere deep within her. She wasn't just defending her rights, she was defending her very identity as a mother. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her car, parked outside the courthouse. The hearing was over, but the outcome was uncertain. Ben sat in the back seat, his head against the window, already half asleep. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror, her eyes reflecting the exhaustion that weighed her down. She had given everything in that courtroom, but she couldn't help feeling the ache of vulnerability. Tom had made sure to highlight every one of her weaknesses. Yet despite the fear, she knew she couldn't stop now. There was no going back. She reached back and gently squeezed Ben's hand. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked. Ben smiled faintly. "I'm okay, Mom." Sarah sighed, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'll never let anything happen to you, I promise." The days after the hearing were filled with a growing sense of dread. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Tom's manipulation was about to escalate. He had always been unpredictable, and now he seemed more determined than ever. One evening, Sarah received a call from Clara. "I'm afraid Tom's lawyer has filed a motion for a temporary injunction. They're claiming you're unfit to care for Ben." Sarah's heart sank. "What does this mean?" Clara's voice was calm but firm. "It means they want to take Ben away from you, at least temporarily. You'll need to be prepared for a court appearance as soon as possible." Sarah's world seemed to crumble. This was the last thing she needed. But she wasn't going to back down. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady. "I won't lose him." The days following the motion for a temporary injunction were filled with an unsettling calm. Sarah knew something was coming. She couldn't shake the feeling that Tom was waiting for the right moment to strike. The court date for the injunction hearing was set, and she spent every waking hour preparing. Ben noticed the change in her. His once cheerful attitude turned more withdrawn, and he asked her questions she didn't have the answers to. "Mom, will I still be able to live here after the hearing?" he asked one evening, his eyes wide with concern. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetie. No matter what happens, we'll be okay." But even she wasn't sure of that anymore. The weight of the situation was taking its toll. The battle was draining every part of her, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. The morning of the injunction hearing arrived. Sarah stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying makeup with shaky hands. She barely recognized herself. The exhaustion was etched in every line of her face, the fear in every movement. Tom's lawyer was pushing for full custody, using every weapon they had. The idea of losing Ben seemed almost unbearable. She finished getting ready, the heaviness of the day ahead settling in her chest. When Ben came into the room, his school uniform neat and his backpack slung over his shoulder, he gave her a tight hug. "Good luck, Mom," he said softly, his eyes full of quiet concern. "We'll be okay." Sarah kissed his forehead, her heart breaking at the innocence in his words. "I love you," she whispered. "We will be okay, I promise." The courtroom was packed, the tension thick in the air as the judge called the hearing to order. Sarah sat between Clara and her lawyer, trying to steady her breath as she watched Tom enter the room. He looked calm, almost smug, as if this was all part of the game to him. The injunction hearing was the next step in his plan to take everything from her. "We're going to fight this," Clara whispered, leaning over to Sarah. "You've done nothing wrong." Sarah nodded, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. Tom's lawyer stood and made their argument, citing Sarah's financial struggles and personal mistakes as evidence that she couldn't provide a stable home. Every word felt like a knife, and Sarah's heart beat faster in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her rights as a mother, she was fighting for her son's future. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah took the stand. She had spent countless nights rehearsing what she would say, but now, with the eyes of everyone on her, she felt like she might collapse. She looked at Ben, sitting in the back of the room, his eyes wide with worry. His presence gave her the strength to speak. "I am not perfect," Sarah began, her voice trembling but steady. "I have made mistakes, and I've struggled. But there is one thing I've never done. I've never stopped loving my son. I've given everything I have to make sure he is safe, happy, and healthy." She paused, her heart racing as she continued. "I will continue to fight for him, because he is my world." The room was still. For a moment, Sarah felt like her words had fallen on deaf ears. But she didn't care. She had spoken the truth, and that was all she could do. After the hearing, Sarah walked out of the courtroom, her heart heavy but her spirit not broken. The judge had made no decision yet, and Sarah knew she would have to wait. But it was over, for now. She walked down the steps of the courthouse, Ben's hand in hers, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of relief. The fight wasn't over, but at least she had spoken her truth. As they reached the car, Ben turned to her. "Mom, I'm proud of you," he said, his small voice filled with innocence. Sarah smiled and knelt down to his level. "I'm proud of you too," she whispered. The fight was far from over, but at least now, Sarah knew she wasn't alone. The days after the hearing were a blur. Sarah woke up every morning with a knot in her stomach, unsure of what the next move would be. The judge still hadn't made a decision, and every moment felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. At work, Sarah found herself unable to focus, her thoughts constantly drifting to the upcoming decision. She glanced over at Ben, who was drawing at the kitchen table, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. She had fought so hard for him, for their future, but now the waiting was the hardest part. "Mom, look!" Ben exclaimed, holding up his drawing of a house. "It's us. We're safe here." Sarah smiled softly, her heart aching. "We are safe, sweetie," she whispered. But deep down, she wasn't sure if that was true anymore. The next few days were filled with more tension. Sarah tried to keep life as normal as possible for Ben, but it was getting harder. His questions about the custody case were becoming more frequent. "Mom, when will we know if we can stay here?" he asked one evening, his small voice full of worry. Sarah didn't know how to answer him. She had no control over the situation, and that made her feel powerless. She had always been the one to protect him, but now she wasn't sure she could. Her thoughts turned to the upcoming court hearing, where she would have to face Tom again. This time, she knew there would be no holding back. Tom had already shown his cards, and now it was Sarah's turn to face the truth of her past. The night before the final court date, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The thought of losing Ben was unbearable. She had given everything for him, and yet it still might not be enough. The feeling of doubt crept in again. Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe Tom would win, and Ben would be taken from her. The pain of those thoughts threatened to swallow her whole. But then she thought of Ben's face, his innocent smile, and the way he looked at her with so much trust. She couldn't let him down. She had fought this hard, and she couldn't give up now. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped away the tears, and promised herself that no matter the outcome, she would fight until the very end. The next day, Sarah walked into the courtroom with a sense of grim determination. Ben was at home with Megan, and Sarah had made sure he was distracted by a movie, so he wouldn't feel the weight of what was happening. As she stood before the judge once again, she felt like every eye was on her. Tom sat on the other side of the room, his expression calm and collected, like he knew he had already won. Sarah's heart beat faster as the judge spoke. This is a difficult case. Both parties have presented their arguments, and the evidence has been reviewed. I have come to a decision. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, unsure of what the judge would say. Every part of her wanted to scream, to beg for Ben's future, but she kept silent, waiting for the verdict that would change everything. The judge's words echoed in Sarah's mind. After careful consideration, I have decided to grant full custody of Ben to Sarah. For a moment, Sarah couldn't believe what she had heard. She had won. She had actually won. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Ben's father, who sat there stunned. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of relief. It wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead. But Ben was staying with her. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Sarah stood there, her knees weak, but her heart full of hope. She had done it. She had fought for Ben, and they would finally have the future they both deserved. The days following the court's decision felt like a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Sarah woke up each morning, the weight of the previous month still heavy on her shoulders, but there was a new sense of peace in her home. Ben was back to his old self, laughing and playing, his innocence returning. For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to feel hope. The house felt warmer, the air lighter, and even the silence wasn't as oppressive. But there was still work to be done. The wounds of the past had left scars that would take time to heal. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was still recovering from the battle. Every time she looked at Ben, her heart swelled with love, but there was also fear. Fear of slipping back into old patterns, fear of losing everything again. But she wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. This time, she would build a life for Ben that was filled with love, stability, and hope. Over the next few weeks, Sarah took small steps toward rebuilding her life. She had started working fewer hours at the diner, her boss agreeing to a more flexible schedule. But the most important change came when she began attending therapy. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to until she started talking to someone. Each session helped her face the pain she had buried for years, and slowly, she began to understand herself better. Her past mistakes no longer defined her, but the fear of failure still lingered. "You've been through a lot, Sarah," her therapist, Dr. Miller, female 50s, said one afternoon. "It's okay to not have everything figured out yet, but you've taken the hardest step. You're learning to live in the present, not the past." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm just so scared, Dr. Miller. Scared that I'll mess it up again." Dr. Miller smiled gently. "You're doing better than you think. Take it one day at a time." As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself growing stronger. She felt more connected to Ben than ever before, their bond solidifying in the wake of the chaos they had endured. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, Ben asked her, "Mom, can we go to the park tomorrow? Just us?" Sarah's heart swelled. It had been a long time since he'd asked for something so simple, something that felt like a normal childhood. "Of course," she said, smiling. "We'll go tomorrow." That night, as she tucked Ben into bed, she whispered, "I'm so proud of you, sweetie. You're so brave." Ben smiled sleepily. "I'm proud of you too, Mom. We're okay now, right?" Sarah kissed his forehead and pulled the blanket up around him. "Yeah, we're okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They both had come so far, and they were finally beginning to heal. The next day, Sarah took Ben to the park as promised. They spent hours there, laughing and playing on the swings. It felt like a simple moment, but to Sarah, it was everything. She watched Ben run around, his laughter filling the air, and she realized that despite all the hardship, they had made it through. As they sat on a bench, sharing an ice cream cone, Ben turned to her. "Do you think we'll always be okay, Mom?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. Sarah's heart ached at the question, but she smiled and squeezed his hand. "We'll always be okay, Ben. As long as we have each other, we're going to be just fine. In that moment, Sarah knew that the fight wasn't just for survival. It was for a life that was full of love, joy, and peace. They had their future, and it was a future she would protect with everything she had. That evening, after they returned home, Sarah stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The house was quieter than usual, but there was a sense of calm that filled the space. She had made it through the hardest part, and now she was finally beginning to heal. Ben came into the kitchen, holding a small piece of paper. "Look, Mom, I made something for you," he said, holding up a drawing of a house with two people holding hands. "It's us, Mom, we're together." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she took the drawing from him, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "I love it, sweetie," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "We're together, and we always will be." That night, as they sat down for dinner, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe it. They were okay. And everything they had fought for had been worth it.